I just wanted to take a moment before we get started here on the content to give a little bit of a plug about some of the resources that we've worked over the past couple of years here at DBHDS to curate specific to behavioral services. So, and we'll also get these links into the chat in just a moment. Our website has a wide array of different resources. And by the way, we're always open to feedback on how to improve this. But one that I wanted to point out to folks is we have a pretty simple but quite functional search engine that's built out of the Power BI platform for therapeutic behavioral consultation providers. So if you are enrolled with DMAS for this service and you're not listed on the search engine and you would like to be, all you have to do is complete the form that's linked here. And again, we will make sure that we have those links included. We got a couple comments here in the chat about folks not being able to see the slides. I'm going to pause for a second and just make sure that we've got those kinks worked out. Is there anybody that's in the chat, I'll ask this, that is able to see the slide deck? I'm trying to determine if this is a global issue. Okay, Becca says she can see them. Okay, thank you, Becca, Laura. Excellent. Okay. Perfect. And we got an animated thumbs up. Okay, hopefully it'll work out for Carrie. So back to the search engine. If you are not listed and you want to be, then you would complete this Microsoft form. It'll come to me and I can get it hopefully posted within 10 days. It's relatively automatic. If you are listed and you need to make some type of update to your listing, then you would complete the form as well, and we'll get that information replaced in about the same amount of time. We can jump onto the next slide, and I'm going to talk a bit about the continuing education requirements here for today. So we are super thrilled to be able to offer continuing education through the Behavior Analyst Certification Board auspices, if you will. We've become an authorized continuing education provider under the BACB, so we can give continuing education to BCBAs, BCABAs, BCBADs, and we can also give a certificate of attendance to any other practitioner type that would like to have one. So if there's any positive behavior support facilitators or LCSWs or professional counselors or any other pedigree that's out there that's attending the training today, we would be happy to give you a certificate of attendance as well for joining in. But I just have to note it would be up to you to determine if what we provide today actually meets the content requirements for continuing education for your specific endorsement or license. I need to outline some pretty specific information about how to obtain a continuing education certificate or the certificate of attendance document. So first, you've got to be in the meeting room within 5 minutes of the event start time. You have to log in individually on your own device so that we can make sure that you're actually in this virtual meeting room, and you must be present throughout the event. We cannot determine if you're in the virtual meeting room, if you're side by side with a colleague, in your physical office, and only your colleague is logged in. So if you're in that situation right now, log in on your own device with the email that you used to register for the event. We cannot make any exceptions to that. Second, you must remain in the meeting room until either I or John or Courtney, our presenters for today, indicate the event has concluded. It's going to be right around an hour. Third, and this is very important, we will provide a quiz link/survey via email. It's not going to be at the end of this training. It will be probably tomorrow via email to anyone that's in the meeting room on time and stays for the duration. Only registrants that meet the first and second requirements are going to get a quiz/survey form. So for example, if something comes up and you're not able to join the training until 20 minutes in, we're not going to be able to send you the link because unfortunately, with our requirements, you would not be eligible for a certificate of attendance or any type of continuing education because you weren't in within 5 minutes of the start time and you did not stay for the entire duration. Again, we'll get that quiz/survey link out. Our target is tomorrow, but I'm gonna say within 48 hours. It's very, very simple. Just follow the instructions on the form to complete it. If you want the CE or certificate of attendance, you have to complete the quiz or survey. And if you are board certified through the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, make sure that you type on that form exactly what your certification number is as it appears on your BACB certificate. So to sum it all up, not to belabor the point, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, you got to be here on time. You have to stay logged in on your own device. You have to stay logged in for the entire training. You must complete the quiz survey. I cannot make any exceptions to what I've noted here, and we will get a certificate of attendance or a CE document to you as quickly as possible. If you are viewing this in the future on our DBHDS YouTube channel, we can't provide you a certificate of attendance or continuing education. It's only for synchronous attendance. So you have to actually be here in this virtual platform on November 13th, 2024. But if you look at this in the future, I hope that you find it to be informative. Now, I've talked too much. Let me get into the good stuff. I'm very pleased to introduce Courtney Pernick and John Tolson. They're both behavior analysts at our team here at DBHDS, and they both have experience conducting functional analyses and practical functional assessments in various settings and with people with different support needs and presentations. And they're going to talk about this more in their presentation, I think at least a couple of times. But I have to note, if you do not have prior training in functional analysis, do not attempt to undertake one simply based on being in this virtual training. Functional analysis procedures require intensive clinical training to execute adequately and additionally have important ethical and safety considerations. So please ensure you remain within your scope of competence and or scope of practice with the FBA methods you employ. Now, without further ado, John and Courtney, please take it away.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. As Nathan mentioned, this training is not meant to prepare clinicians to be able to conduct a PFA. It's just an overview. Further training is needed. Objectives for the training are to discuss how functional analyses, FAs, improve the results of your functional behavior assessment, discuss the difference between the PFA and traditional FAs, give an overview of the practical functional assessment, and discuss the use of PFAs with adult populations. All right, a functional behavioral assessment helps practitioners better understand the purpose of behavior serves for a person. Having more evidence of function can lead to better treatment that helps clinicians develop hypotheses about what the person is trying to get or what the person is trying to avoid. By developing hypotheses, we have a greater understanding of identifying whether the behavior is maintained by social positive, social negative, automatic positive, automatic negative, or in combination of reinforcing contingencies. Conducting a good FBA can alter antecedent variables by changing the motivating operations and or discriminative stimuli that trigger problem behavior, alter consequence variables by eliminating the source of reinforcement, and help to identify appropriate replacement behaviors that are functionally equivalent. Okay, if we don't do this, there are pitfalls to arbitrarily selecting insufficient, premature hypotheses that could lead to treatment that is ineffective, inefficient, and harmful. I'm going to go over a fictional case example here. Let's say that a procedure is being implemented in a group home setting to attempt to decrease an individual's aggressive behavior when they are asked to take a shower. When the individual engages in aggression, the person is asked to go to their room. The plan is operating under the assumption that the individual does not want to take a shower and therefore won't be able to get access to a perceived community outing. However, it could be possible that the events after the shower are aversive to the individual, such as completing pre-vocational tasks, riding in a van, interacting with other people. Without understanding the relations between the consequence of postponing aversive activities in the community by escaping from them, it is highly probable that aggression will continue. Even worse, this behavior could extend to similar circumstances in the future that reinforces further reclusion. Other interventions may continue to be implemented with this individual, but without understanding the function and context, the effectiveness of the intervention cannot be predicted. Ineffective treatment could potentially prolong improvements in behavior. All right, we're going to dive into indirect assessments here. So indirect assessments do not require any direct observation. Most common examples are behavioral interviews, rating scales, questionnaires, and checklists. Behavioral interviews can be used to obtain information about antecedents, challenging behavior, and consequences that may include descriptions of settings, times, types of activities, preferences, communication repertoire, and how often challenging behavior occurs, among others. The functional assessment interview, behavior diagnostic and treatment information form, and open-ended functional assessment interview are all examples of behavioral interviews. Clinicians can use behavioral rating scales to ask informants to estimate the extent to which the behavior occurs under specified conditions using a Likert scale. Higher ratings on conditions are hypothesized to be the function or functions of behavior in question. Examples include, but not limited to, motivation assessment scale, problem behavior questionnaire, functional analysis screening tool, and questions about behavior function. All right, so pros for this tool: can guide more empirical assessment, can aid in developing hypotheses. Practitioners typically find these assessments convenient, less effortful than other assessments. Some cons is that they have been repeatedly demonstrated to be unreliable, such as the motivating assessment scale and the questions about behavior function. They can produce undifferentiated results. In my personal experience as a clinician, there are many times when I observe the use of behavioral rating scales rendering unreliable results. Functions such as medical and physical seem to be rated high compared to more apparent functions of problem behavior. Yeah, moving on. All right, with descriptive assessments, there is direct observation, but there is no adjustment of the environment. There are no particular conditions, so think of these as fly-on-the-wall assessments. With the ABC continuous recording, the observer records the antecedent, problem behavior, and consequence during an individual's natural routine. Codes for recording specific antecedents, problem behavior, and consequences can be developed to make it easier for data collection. When using narrative recording, data is collected only when the behavior occurs and is noted in an open-ended format. This may be best suited for gathering preliminary information before using other measures. Think of observing the individual and recording everything that the person does. Scatterplot recording is used when the observer is interested in specific times when the behavior occurs. Behavior is coded across a period of time that is broken down into intervals, such as a 30-minute segment of time or an hour. It may be beneficial in providing information on when problem behavior occurs the most, and could provide information on times when further assessment can be conducted. Pros of descriptive assessments. So correlations may reflect causal relations, where conditional probabilities can be derived, could provide information at pinpoint times when problem behavior is more likely to occur. Cons: descriptive assessments tend to yield false positives for an attention function, which leads to invalid results, such as most people would tend to someone who is kicking them, making irritating noises when engaging in self-interest behavior, suggesting that attention is the function of the behavior. We know that research has shown that attention makes up for only 1/4 to 1/3 of cases examined. They may also yield false negatives for the escape function, as others in the environment may avoid demands. They can often take a long time, as observers have to wait for problem behavior to occur in uncontrolled environments. The functional analysis is the gold standard in verifying variables that are maintaining problem behavior. Traditional functional analyses are often referred to as analog, as different conditions are rotated in a systematic manner, typically in a controlled setting. A functional analysis usually has 4 different conditions comprised of a controlled play condition, attention, escape, ignore alone, and sometimes a tangible condition may replace one of the conditions or is peppered in there. However, functional analyses should be flexible where conditions may be added or omitted from an assessment based off of presumed hypotheses of function. All right, pros of this tool. Functional analyses are the scientific standard that can yield clear results of variable or variables that are maintaining problem behavior. A functional analysis can serve as a baseline, which can sometimes be difficult to obtain for free operant behaviors or behaviors that can occur at any time. Naturalistic observations occurring throughout the day with an abundance of conditions tend to be highly variable. Effective reinforcement procedures can be developed based on empirical results. Cons: assessment process may temporarily increase problem behavior. Not all people understand it. Could have problems with buy-in, or conducted in a contrived setting, take too much time, effort, and FAs may trigger dangerous behavior. However, on the following slides, we will discuss in more detail alternatives to conducting a traditional analog FA. All right, here's our first question. As Nathan mentioned, these will be in a feedback survey that we're going to provide you, and you're going to have to make sure that you pick the correct answer here. So, question 1. Which of these is the best reason to conduct a functional analysis? A, it is a billable activity. B, it is not recommended because indirect assessments are sufficient. C, insufficient premature efforts to understand function could lead to treatment that is ineffective, inefficient, and harmful. D, it is quick, it does not require any certification. E, all of the above, or F, none of the above. If you want to put in the chat, you can. If not, it's all right. We're going to review the answer here shortly. I'll give you a second to think about it. And it looks like everybody, for the most part, is getting it right. You are correct. The correct answer is C. Insufficient premature efforts to understand function could lead to treatment that is ineffective, inefficient, and harmful. Okay. So in the past, some clinicians, such as myself, were taught to start with indirect assessments. If not confident with the results, move on to descriptive assessments. If you still do not have a clear hypothesis of function, conduct a functional analysis. So an alternative approach, which of course is why we are here today, is to start with a practical functional assessment. You may be able to get a clear understanding of why the behavior is occurring in a shorter amount of time than conducting multiple behavioral assessments. All right. So let's unpack some of the obstacles with conducting a functional analysis pertaining to what I've mentioned in the previous slides. Over the past 2 decades, there has been an extensive amount of research pertaining to variations in functional analyses to remedy the concerns for conducting them. All right, so let's look at barrier 1 here. It takes too much time. So there was an FA called a brief functional analysis that has shown that 1 to 5 minute sessions are just as valid as longer ones. Research utilizing trial-based functional analysis found that using 1 minute sessions in 2 conditions were adequate to developing reliable hypotheses of problem behavior. All right, they're too complex. Training is important, and I'm not here to diminish that. And the goal of this training is not for you to take what we have presented and begin implementing the procedures the next day. However, once you understand the process, it may not be as complicated as it looks. Analysis can be done with just 2 conditions, such as a control or baseline condition and a test condition where problem behavior is likely to occur. All right, it's unsafe. So the question to ask is, will the problem behavior be more dangerous in or outside of the analysis? A properly designed functional analysis will almost always result in lesser intense problem behavior. Options of variations of analysis include latency-based FAs, where the behavior is reinforced right away, as well as reinforcing precursor behaviors that serves the same response class. As mentioned before, the sessions can be short. They are difficult to sell to constituents. So it may be difficult for some consumers to understand the FA process. A common question that may come up might go like this, like, why would you want to set up conditions to make problem behavior even worse? It doesn't seem to make much sense that you would want to reinforce problem behavior and so on. I know that these are in the past questions that consumers have asked me. Building a therapeutic relationship first is key. This can be done during the initial stages of the process. Describe ethical reasons for understanding the function of challenging behavior before beginning treatment. It may be helpful to use analogies to explain the process. So just consider describing medical appointments where a person undergoes uncomfortable tests for the greater good of figuring out viable treatments. Dr. Greg Hanley uses the analogy of going to an allergist, where there's a control poke with saline, followed by multiple pokes of allergens to figure out what substance is causing irritation. A good allergist will provide multiple pokes of the same allergen, or will repeat a smaller test to ensure they are confident they have it right. When conducting an FA, make sure to include conditions relayed by the caregiver or supporter or the individual so that a connection between the two is apparent, making it meaningful. It is important to obtain consent and assent to ensure that all parties understand that both can be withdrawn at any time. All right, don't have a controlled setting. There are many different FA options that make it possible to conduct a FA in the individual's natural environment. It may be relevant to do this to create conditions where the problem behavior occurs. FAs such as the trial-based FA can accomplish this. One FA that may be used to overcome all these obstacles is the practical functional assessment, which is, of course, why we are here today. All right, so what is the PFA? It is a process that starts with an open-ended interview with caregivers, or those who know the person best. Then, using the information from the interview, a functional analysis is conducted called an ISCA, Interview-Informed Synthesized Contingency Analysis. The priorities of the PFA are safety for all involved, dignity for the individual, televisibility, meaning would you feel comfortable if this was broadcasted for others to see, and establishing rapport with the learner and caregivers. There are two overall goals of the PFA, and they are to identify a context where the individual is happy, relaxed, and engaged without problem behavior, and to show influence over the problem behavior, meaning you can turn the behavior on and off, rather than being concerned with isolated reinforcement contingency that maintains problem behavior, looking more deeply in the context. So during functional analyses, establishing operations, or EOs, are contrived during test conditions to evoke problem behavior. In traditional functional analyses, establishing operations for specific reinforcement, such as attention, escape, tangible, are isolated for their respective conditions. Synthesized contingencies involve presenting a myriad of evocative events or EOs at once, such as providing an individual with a toy paired with attention, or providing a toy along with escaping a non-preferred task. In a PFA, all co-occurring behaviors in a particular response class are reinforced. For example, if yelling occurs shortly before aggression when an item is taken away, the behavior of yelling is reinforced rather than only reinforcing aggression. The purpose of this slide is to illustrate the difference of isolated and synthesized contingencies. For example, let's say a child engages in hitting to get access to tangibles. When the child engages in this behavior, they have learned that it is highly likely they will get what they want, such as a teddy bear. Below, you would find an example of a synthesized contingency of hitting and yelling. These behaviors are co-occurring and are reinforced both by attention and tangible reinforcement. Information regarding these types of synthesized contingencies that likely reinforce problem behavior are provided by an informant or multiple people who know the individual very well during the open interview process. I apologize if this graph is small, a little hard to read. Please check out the article if you would like for further information, but this graph was taken from Slavin et al. 2017, where they compared the ISCA to a standard functional analysis. And just a note for our viewers here, there are many more results that are not presented on this slide. In these graphs, you will see examples of reinforcing synthesized contingencies compared to reinforcing isolated contingencies. So synthesized, you got your ISCA on the left, standard FA on the right, your isolated contingencies. And these graphs are ones, which are more serious forms of problem behavior, were plotted using black data points, and our twos, co-occurring and precursor behaviors, were plotted using gray data points. White data points indicate problem behavior occurring in the play control condition. In this study, comparative analysis shows that synthesized reinforcement conditions influence problem behavior more compared to isolated conditions. So this conveys a different type of precision. Isolating a single reinforcer for a single topography can identify the isolated impact on each reinforcer suspected of maintaining problem behavior. Combining variables that co-occur together can offer precision in emulating natural contexts in which problem behavior occurs. In the first graph up at the top here, R1 problem behavior was evoked when presented with a synthesized contingency of escape the toys and attention compared to the isolated contingencies tested. In the second graph, problem behavior was evoked for both. However, each FA provided different information. During the ISCA condition, R2 or precursor behavior was emitted when the synthesized contingency of escape the toys and preferred conversations were provided, compared to the isolated contingency of escape only. The graph at the bottom shows that problem behavior was evoked for both, but undifferentiated results were apparent in the standard FA. The problem behavior of most concern did not occur in the standard FA across these participants. All right, question 2 here. What are some features of the PFA? A, open-ended interview, functional analysis, and synthesized contingencies. B, showing influence over the behavior. C, 5 isolated conditions, control, escape, attention, tangible, alone. D, all of the above. Or E, both A and B. You can probably put it in the chat if you'd like and take a minute to think about it.
Oh, we've got some variation here in our answers. Okay. So the answer here is E, both A and B. So make sure you guys have that correct answer documented if you are planning to get CEUs for this event. Okay, so let's dive in to the PFA process. The first step of the PFA is to conduct the open-ended interview. There are 20 questions that can take anywhere from 10 to 45 minutes to complete. This usually depends on the person or the people you're interviewing. As stated earlier, you want to do this with those who know the individual well. I have completed this step using various methods, so you can interview an entire group of caregivers at once or interview caregivers separately. I've even given the blank form to caregivers to complete, and then once they return it, I can ask follow-up questions. However you choose to complete the interview, it's important that you're asking follow-up questions to make sure you're getting the information you need. In order to stay on track and obtain the information you need, keep in mind this 4-part mission. Identify and define the most severe problem behaviors and associated non-dangerous behaviors. We refer to these as R1s and R2s. Identify EOs that are most challenging yet convenient to replicate. Identify the reinforcers and the precise forms of delivery. Identify the final behavioral expectations for the individual and at least 3 relevant contexts with sufficient contextual details to ensure the goals are meaningful if the problem behavior was no longer a barrier. Here's an example of the interview form that was developed by Dr. Greg Hanley. This, along with other materials, are made available to the public on the website practicalfunctionalassessment.com. At the top of the document, you'll see just demographic information. You can always modify this for confidentiality purposes. In this section, the interviewee should spend time understanding the person's language abilities. This helps better conduct the assessment if you know the individual's verbal repertoire. It's also important to ask questions about preferred leisure activities as well as preferred interactions. This next section will help give an understanding of what the challenging behaviors look like, which ones are of most concern, those are ones, precautions to consider, and precursor behaviors, so those that happen prior to the more serious behavior, are R2s. These next questions aim to inform the interviewer, about antecedents that may trigger problem behavior and the contingencies that maintain the behavior. And the last question will help determine what skills or tasks to present during the test conditions, and will later help shape the teaching process. As mentioned earlier, the goal is to gather information to identify EOs that are most challenging yet manageable to replicate, identify reinforcers, their precise forms of delivery, and identify the final behavioral expectations for the individual in at least 3 relevant contexts with sufficient details to ensure the goals are meaningful if the problem behavior was not a barrier. All right, once you have interviewed all the selected caregivers, you want to move on to the analysis portion of the PFA. Using the information gathered during the interview, you will design the ISCA. Highly recommend that you use the PFA workbook from practicalfunctionalassessment.com. It lays it out very nicely for you. You will design 2 different contexts for the analysis, a reinforcement context and an establishing operation or EO context. The reinforcement context should include as many of the identified reinforcers from that interview, and the EO context should include items and activities that are most likely to evoke the problem behavior, which you also should learn during the interview. Once the ISCA has been designed and the materials are gathered, you'll run the analysis. This begins with establishing HRE, which is happy, relaxed, and engaged, in the reinforcement context. Once the individual is displaying HRE for at least 5 minutes, begin alternating between test and control conditions, or between EO and reinforcement context. You will continue to alternate between the reinforcement context and EO context until control over the behavior is established. And that means you can reliably turn the behavior on and off. All right, so now we are going to go into a little more detail on those reinforcement and EO contexts. So we'll talk about the reinforcement context first. This is a context in which the reinforcers that are specific to the learner are freely and continuously available. This is done to establish rapport and trust while also making sure they can achieve high levels of engagement with no problem behavior. Some examples of things you might see in the reinforcement context are attention from caregivers or no attention from caregivers, being left alone, electronics, music, games, toys, bouncing on a ball, sitting on a beanbag, rocking in a chair, jumping up and down, etc. There should be no demands, so you want to be careful how you interact with the individual during this time. Try to avoid asking questions or even leading how they're interacting with the items. The individual should be in control during this context, within reason, of course. You want to create an environment where the individual is happy, relaxed, and engaged. So what that looks like is they have a happy affect, they're showing a desire to be in the moment, they're calm, there are no signs of stress or anxiety, and there's actual engagement and participation in the activities. And while I mentioned a minimum time before switching context, time should not be the deciding factor for starting the EO progression. The decision should be based on the individual and how they are presenting. Once you decide the individual has been HRE, happy, relaxed, and engaged, for an adequate amount of time, you'll introduce that EO context. And the EO context should include skills for teaching, which you've identified in the workbook during the design phase. And it should be a progression. So we're not going to just present every EO all at once. You're going to progress, and it usually starts with relinquishing reinforcers, then transitioning to a separate space or location, and then completing a task. In this context, the implementer is leading or is in control. And so it should be a contrast between that reinforcement context where the learner was leading. And you might also hear the EO context referred to as the table of high expectations. Here's an example of what that EO progression might look like. So the implementer will stand, clap, say the individual's name, place a demand, and then continue placing demands and removing reinforcement until problem behavior occurs. And as soon as problem behavior or a precursor to problem behavior occur, immediately remove all demands, return access to all reinforcers, and return to that seated, relaxed state. So your EO progression can vary. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. So for example, maybe you're not sitting and then standing and then sitting again. Just make sure that it's clear to the individual that there's a change from reinforcement to work or to table of high expectations. If problem behavior doesn't occur, you want to continue progressing the EO and placing demands. In some cases, problem behavior might not occur. This could happen for a number of reasons. Go ahead and allow the learner to return to the reinforcement context, and then try again. If you're still unable to evoke problem behavior, you might want to do some troubleshooting just to make sure both the reinforcement context and the EO context are correct for that learner. Ending the analysis. So after the behavior has been quickly turned off and the learner returns to HRE 5 times, the analysis is complete. And this is just a general guide. Some people might feel that 3 times is sufficient to show control. You're going to do what makes the most sense for your learner. It's important to note that anyone can end the analysis at any time. So the learner, the implementer, the caregivers, observers. Just remember, safety and dignity are 2 priorities of the PFA process. And then after ending the analysis, you want to complete the reflection section and summary statements from that workbook that I talked about from the practicalfunctionalassessment.com website. And it looks like this. And you'll just kind of go through and ensure that all of those things were established during your analysis. Okay, that brings us to our third question. What are the 2 contexts used during the ISCA? Is it A, play and tangible, B, together and apart, C, reinforcement and EO, D, loud and quiet, or E, none of the above? Go ahead. Oh, there you go. Put your answers in the chat. I think we've got unanimous responses here. All right, and that answer is C, reinforcement and EO. Well done. Okay, so here's a video example of an ISCA. And this video is borrowed with permission from the PFA and SBT Community Resources page. In this video, you'll see the person lying on the pink ball, or purple ball, sorry, is the learner, and the person knelt down is the implementer. We clipped the video for time's sake, so we're not showing this full ISCA. We're gonna start it after that 5 minutes of HRE. And then you'll see the implementer starts the EO progression. And at the first sign of problem behavior, they quickly remove the demands and return to that reinforcement context. So we'll show you 3 of those transitions during this ISCA. And I really hope the audio works. Okay, so you saw, you can see there's a variety of materials laying on the floor, the individuals bouncing on a ball on their stomach, and just notice the implementer is not in any way trying to guide the learner in how to interact with those materials. That learner is free to kind of interact with them however they choose. When it's time for the EO context, the implementer stands, claps, says the person's name, moves closer, and at the first sign of problem behavior, they move back and kneel back down. Notice they're not trying to have a bunch of interaction with the individual. That person is leading their interaction. They reach out for a high five a couple of times. There's, they're the implementer is just following that learner's lead during the reinforcement context. Okay, here is an example of a data sheet. This is the data sheet that was pulled from the the Practical Functional Assessment.com website. If you can video record your ISCA, it's a lot easier, and then you can collect the data, track the data afterwards while you're watching the recording. If you can't record it, I highly recommend having a second person with you during the ISCA, so one person can collect the data while the other person runs the analysis. I am going to use the drawing tool to fill in this data sheet with completely made up information. But there's also an ISCA app that is available if you prefer that over paper data. But it is not free, so you do have to pay for that. So for those of you who are not familiar with this data sheet, it looks hopefully not too overwhelming. Here at the top is time. So these are the minutes, and then those are further broken down into 30-second intervals. That's just the amount of time spent in the analysis. These two rows here, R1 and R2, are problem behavior that occurs during that EO context. So R2s are the precursor behaviors, R1s are the more serious problem behaviors. This indicates the amount of time that you spend in the EO context, and this row here indicates the amount of time spent in the reinforcement context. These two rows below here are for problem behavior that occurs in the reinforcement context. This bottom row indicates whether or not the individual was happy, relaxed, and engaged during that 30-second interval. So I'm just going to make this up off the top of my head here and do my best to draw on this data sheet for you. So you start your analysis out, as we said, you want 5 minutes of HRE. You always start out in the reinforcement context. So you always start your line here. And then if the person was HRE during that interval, you would mark it here. And so let's say it takes us about a minute, and then we establish HRE with this learner. And we continue in the reinforcement context, marking our 30-second intervals. It looks much better when you do it with pencil and paper and not a computer mouse. But you want to get all the way to 5 minutes before you start your EO progression. So there's our 5 minutes of HRE. And then we say, okay, Bobby, it's time to clean up. We move to the EO context. And Bobby yells and engages in SIB. And we say, never mind, Bobby, you don't have to clean up. We jump right back to reinforcement. And Bobby's still a little bit mad, and he continues yelling no for like the next minute. And then we continue reinforcement. And then let's say about here, we establish HRE again. And so we decide, okay, Bobby, it's time to clean up. We go back to that EO context, and Bobby yells no. And we say, never mind, you don't need to. And we go back to the reinforcement context. And Bobby is quite happy about that. And so you will continue this alternating between reinforcement and EO until you have determined that you have control over that problem behavior by turning it on and off quickly. And now here is an example of what that data looks like on a graph. These are also graphs that are used on the practicalfunctionalassessment.com website. This is fictional data, and I'll orient you to these graphs as best as I can. So the x-axis displays the time from the analysis. Along the y-axis, from the top to bottom, you're going to see this first series of data indicates the time the learner is happy, relaxed, and engaged. The second series of data indicates any problem behavior that occurs during the reinforcement context. So we have the black diamonds for severe problem behavior, or R1s, and white diamonds for minor problem behavior, or R2s. The third series shows the time spent in the reinforcement context. The next series displays problem behavior that occurs during the EO context. And the bottom series indicates the time in the EO context. So it looks like consistent HRE started around the 15-minute mark, and then they started the EO progression around 21 minutes, and severe problem behavior occurred. They immediately reinforced the behavior, and then you can see there was some carryover where behavior occurred in the reinforcement context. Then again, at 26 minutes, they progressed the EO with only one incident of severe problem behavior and fewer carryover when returning to reinforcement. And you can see as the analysis goes on that the clinician was able to they were able to turn the behavior on and off 5 times consecutively, right around here. And the analysis ends with the learner in reinforcement. You always want to end in reinforcement. And this ensures that the individual is safe and also helps with building rapport. Here's another example of a data sheet that you can use. This one is arranged with columns per condition. In this fictional example, the 5-minute ISCA conditions consisted of control, test, test, test. Only precursor behaviors, or R2s, occurred in the 3 test conditions. Precursor behaviors occurred 7 times in the first test condition, 6 times in the second test condition, followed by 5 occurrences in the last test condition. The graph to the right displays data with the white data points showing that no problem behavior occurred in the control conditions, and those black data points display the occurrence of problem behavior in the test conditions. These data were graphed as rate per minute. So there's just 2 options for collecting and graphing your data. All right, so the majority of the PFA research is with children. Just note this process can also be used with adults just as easily as with children. Some things you might notice that are different is the process is exactly the same actually. So everything we talked about today is the same for all adults. However, adults do have a longer learning history, so the results might not happen as quickly as you might see with young children. And reinforcers might look a little bit different. So when you're working with young children, maybe you're blowing bubbles and singing Old MacDonald, but with adults, you might see more of drinking their favorite coffee and watching Family Guy on the iPad. All right, so here are some resources that we've gathered for further training and information. If you want to use this process, we highly recommend that you go complete the 10-hour training at the FTF website. This first one. And then the Practical Functional Assessment website has information and resources from Dr. Greg Hanley and his team. The PFA and SBT community website has tons of materials. Those were added from clinicians who are using the process. And then if you are interested in seeing how this process works with adults, the Upstate Caring Partners YouTube channel has some videos of their staff in action. So all of those are very helpful resources. And here are the resources we used to create this training. I noticed Nathan was putting some of these articles in the chat for us. So thank you. All right, so this does conclude the training, but please feel free to stick around because we are going to have some time for questions and answers. So if you have questions, you can type them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. If you would like links other than what we have provided here, please reach out. My email and John's email are on this slide, or if you have any other questions. And then make sure that you fill out the feedback survey that we will be sending out via email if you would like CEUs and/or participation certificate. DBHDS will be providing more free CEU opportunities in the future, so please stay tuned as those are announced.